An explosive investigation from Middle East Eye has revealed how the British Foreign Secretary threatened the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor, reportedly telling him that issuing arrest warrants against Israel would be akin to dropping a hydrogen bomb. The threats happened in a phone conversation in April 2024 between the UK's then Foreign Secretary David Cameron and the ICC prosecutor Karim Khan. It happened weeks before Khan called for arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and 3 of Hamas's senior leaders. The warrants accused Netanyahu and Gallant of using starvation as a weapon of war, as well as murder and persecution against Palestinians in Gaza. While the charges were celebrated by many in the international community as a necessary step to holding Israel accountable for its actions since October 7, they were met with hostility from the United States. In February this year, the Trump administration sanctioned Karim Khan, freezing his bank accounts in the UK and barring him and his family from traveling to the US. Then last week, those sanctions were extended to the ICC judges, who approved the arrest warrants. But while the US and Israel have long rejected the International Court's authority and are not signatories of the Rome Statute, the UK is, and is bound by the court's decision to arrest the Israeli leaders. Yet, according to former staff working at the ICC prosecutor's office, David Cameron warned Karim Khan that the UK would withdraw from the ICC and defund the court if it was forced to make that decision. In a heated phone call, Cameron reportedly told Khan that going ahead with the arrest warrants would be like dropping a hydrogen bomb, and that it would make the ICC look like it was losing the plot. Khan responded to Cameron's threats of withdrawing from the Rome Statute, saying that if it were to occur, then it would have to accept that the rules-based system would be dead. Cameron replied, saying that Khan was making a huge mistake and that the world was not ready for this. A month later, Karim Khan went ahead with the charges, indicating that then unknown figures had attempted to intimidate him and his team.
It is critical in this moment that my office and all parts of the court continue to conduct our work with full independence and impartiality. And I insist that all attempts to impede, to intimidate, or to improperly influence the officials of this court cease immediately.
Now, to help tell us more, we are joined by one of the reporters that worked on that story, MEE political reporter Imran Mullah. Imran, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You worked on the story. You have been digging into it for some time. Tell me how it all came together.
Well, this was a story that required some investigation. So David Hurst, the editor-in-chief of Middle East Eye, and I went to Amsterdam to visit The Hague, which hosts the International Criminal Court. And there we spoke to several sources with knowledge of this phone call. They knew what had happened. Some of them were former staff in the office of Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor of the ICC, and some of them had seen the minutes of this meeting between Khan and David Cameron.
Now, we have played some of the quotes from the call itself, but it's hard to capture what the mood and the tone of that phone conversation was. How would you describe it?
Well, it was a very heated conversation, and we have to remember that this was an unprecedented situation. At this point, Karim Khan, the British chief prosecutor, was planning to seek arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. He had made that decision in mid-March. He had told the US in April. He'd also told Britain in April. And by the 23rd of April, David Cameron knew all about this and was calling him to express his concern. So Karim Khan would presumably have expected this, but what he would not have expected was for David Cameron to actually threaten him. So our sources tell us that Cameron repeatedly shouted over Khan, spoke aggressively, and that Khan had to ask to be able to finish his points. And Cameron told him he was making a very serious mistake. He told him you have to step back from the brink. He said you'd lose the dressing room with the ICC's major allies like the UK and the US. And he said ultimately twice that the UK would withdraw from the Rome Statute, which is the ICC's founding charter.
So he was trying to convince in that phone call, from what we understand, he was trying to convince Karim Khan that this was going to undermine the ICC's reputation, that as you describe in the story, that he told him that people would think the ICC had lost the plot.
Yes, exactly. And he said it's one thing to go after Russian leaders, but it's another to go after Israel when it's seeking to defend itself from the Hamas attack of October the 7th. So Khan said that, look, we've been engaging with Israel for 3 years and it hasn't produced a response. But Cameron wouldn't accept this. So neither side were accepting each other's position. And Khan told Cameron that if the UK defunds the court and withdraws from the Rome Statute, then the rules-based order would be dead. And Cameron said that the world is not ready for this, for the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant.
That's incredible. From what you understand, how did this phone call leave Karim Khan feeling?
Well, sources who spoke to him just hours after the call said that he seemed very upset. He seemed surprised by what had happened. He didn't reference Cameron directly, but he said he had had a call from a statesman, a world leader, who had told him, who had made this threat. And he said, I don't like feeling pressurized. He said, I won't say if it rises to blackmail. And he was clearly very upset. So sources said that Khan said essentially that Cameron, this leader, had debased the nation, had debased a people, and that they had no right to do that. So this seemed to be a very momentous moment in the history of the ICC, and so the history of the rules-based order, because Britain was one of the architects of that order. It was one of the countries that actually founded the ICC.
You would have reached out to David Cameron and the Foreign Office for comments. Did you hear back from them?
So Lord Cameron didn't respond to multiple requests for comment, and the Foreign Office declined to comment.
And so I'm guessing you're going to keep chasing them up to try and get some kind of response?
Well, yes, indeed. And we would hope that the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, would say something, that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, would say something, because the policy of the Labour government is different to the Tory government. Labour has said that they respect the independence of the court, and they said that when Khan announced he was going to seek warrants. He was going to seek these arrest warrants on the 20th of May. They also said that in November, when the arrest warrants were actually issued. Now, they wouldn't explicitly say that Netanyahu would be arrested if he came to Britain, but they did say that they would abide by their legal responsibilities. So it's safe to assume that Netanyahu won't be making any trips to the UK anytime soon.
Right, because that has been kind of the major testing point for the UK and other European states as to whether or not they will abide by the Rome Statute. Obviously, the UK didn't follow through with the threats that David Cameron is quoted as saying, that they will withdraw completely from the ICC. But where has that left Israeli leadership when it comes to visiting the UK?
Well, we have to remember that the Tories lost power in July. So if the Conservative government was still around in November when the arrest warrants were issued, it might have been a different situation. So Cameron's threat was never put to the test. But Israeli leaders have still visited the UK, not Netanyahu and Gallant, but the foreign minister, Gideon Saar, recently, just a few months ago, made a secret trip to the UK. Now, he doesn't have a warrant out for his arrest, but there was an attempt by legal groups during his visit to seek a warrant. They were accusing him of being complicit in war crimes, and the Attorney General blocked that attempt. But it was telling that this was a secret trip. It wasn't announced. We reported on it. It was our exclusive, and no one in the mainstream press reported on it for days afterwards, and that wouldn't have been the case a few years ago. And normally there would be great fanfare around a trip like this, but instead it happened in secrecy, and that is a very good indicator of where UK-Israel relations are at today.
Now, you mentioned the media in the UK. Obviously, the story comes out yesterday. It's a big exclusive. It is about not only a former foreign secretary, but a former prime minister, and his conduct while he was in office. Has it been picked up by other media outlets in the UK?
It hasn't been picked up by any mainstream British media outlets at the time that we're speaking. I hope that it will be, because it's a big story and it will go in the history books. 100 years from now, people will talk about the fact that the British Foreign Secretary threatened the ICC chief prosecutor. That's absolutely incredible. It's unprecedented, it's extraordinary, and it definitely will go down in history. It will certainly besmirch Lord Cameron's name if he doesn't, come out and clarify his position. And Cameron may be at risk because the Rome Statute, Article 70 of the Rome Statute. Now, I'm no legal expert, but it specifically mentions the offence of attempting to intimidate or impede or persuade an official of the court not to do their duty. And Cameron will stand accused of that by many people. Many would say that he has done that. And we need to hear his response.
And we will have a legal expert coming up later in the show, so we'll definitely put that question to her. But speaking about David Cameron himself, and I remember the moment where he was brought back into the government by Rishi Sunak, and this was at the end of 2023. This was a moment where the Sunak government was facing millions of people protesting in the streets of London. It was a real challenge. Their response to the war and the genocide in Gaza was seen as a real weak point for Rishi Sunak, who was not seen as strong on foreign policy, and so he brings in David Cameron, who's this heavyweight of British politics and of foreign policy. How does this story land in describing the way that David Cameron handled that position?
Well, Cameron boasted that no one had been tougher on the Israelis than he. And he said that, I've phoned them, I've sent them messages complaining about their conduct. But the fact is that Cameron even publicly opposed what the International Criminal Court was doing, what Karim Khan was doing. And then it was the Sunak government, with Cameron as Foreign Secretary, that actually filed an objection to the International Criminal Court in June, arguing that it didn't have the jurisdiction to go after Netanyahu and Gallant. And that objection was dropped by the Labour government, which came in the next month. But that is Cameron's legacy, extreme support for Israel's war in Gaza.
Since this story has come out, you've been talking to a lot of people in Parliament and getting their reactions. What have people been telling you?
Well, about 10 MPs have so far commented on this. For example, the Labour MP Zara Sultana has called for David Cameron to be investigated for war crimes. Other MPs have said that if these reports are true, there needs to be consequences. There have been calls for parliamentary investigation. Ayub Khan, the independent MP, made one of these calls. Labour MP Kim Johnson said that the Labour government needs to urgently come out and distance itself from what Cameron has done and to clarify its position with regards to the ICC. But one of the most interesting responses for me has been from the Scottish Parliament, from the former Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf. Now, his was a significant intervention because he was actually the Scottish First Minister at the time that Cameron, as Foreign Secretary of Britain, made this threat. And Humza Yousaf told me that these allegations are, he called them shameful. He said he accused Cameron of hypocrisy. He said that these revelations show that the UK government is complicit in atrocities in Gaza. These are extremely strong statements from the former Scottish First Minister.
I'm sure we will be getting more reactions in the coming days. Finally, Imran, last month the Labour government came out with a strong, probably the strongest statement against the Israeli government that we've had to date. They promised concrete action against Israel if it didn't allow international aid to come in, if it didn't walk back its military expansion in Gaza. What have they done so far? What have we seen?
Well, relations have been better between the UK and Israel, and today we've had this news that the UK is sanctioning Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, two Israeli ministers, far-right Israeli ministers. Now, this is significant. We shouldn't dismiss it. It's very important. It's going to be difficult for UK-Israel relations to be restored to what they were. I can't see that happening anytime soon. However, this is not a very substantive policy. The UK and France were rumoured to be gearing up to recognise the State of Palestine at a conference that's happening next week, a UN conference. But we broke an exclusive last week that the US had warned them against recognizing a Palestinian state, and a few days later there was a Guardian report saying that they'd backed down from that. So we'll see. This hasn't been confirmed, but recognizing a Palestinian state would cause a diplomatic earthquake, and it would genuinely be significant, and it looks likely that they won't do that anymore. And so in the face of that, these sanctions don't seem that impactful.
Plenty to follow up on, and we'll be keep talking to you in the coming days, I'm sure. Imran Mullah, great work. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And you can read the full story by Imran and MEE Chief Editor David Hurst by going to our website at middleeasteye.net. Now, back in January 2024, David Cameron was asked whether he believed Israel had breached international law in Gaza. Here's what he had to say then.
About 2 or 3 minutes ago, in answer a reply to the chair, you said, and I quote, "One of the things we'd like the Israelis to do is switch the water back on." Now, that says that they turned it off. It says that you recognise they have the power to turn it on. Therefore, isn't turning water off and having the ability to turn it back on but choosing not to, isn't that a breach of international humanitarian law?
It's just something they ought to do, in my view.
No, of course they should do it. Every human being would say you don't cut people's water supply off. But I'm asking you, in your position as Foreign Secretary, around the point of international humanitarian law, if Israel have the power to turn the water back on that they turned off, surely that is a flagrant breach of international humanitarian law.
Well, I'm not a lawyer. My view is they ought to switch it on because the north of Gaza, the conflict is now effectively over there, and so getting more water and power into northern Gaza would be a very good thing to do. You don't have to be a lawyer to make a judgment about that. You just have to be a human being.